So on to point six and economic growth. I have a lot to say about economic growth, but I'll try to keep this short. Um, you've heard me talk a lot in my earlier points about reducing spending, specifically reducing defense spending, foreign spending, and any other type of spending we can curtail in order to get that massive national debt down. However, anytime you talk about reducing spending, there's a possibility that you restrict economic growth, contract the economy, which could reduce the tax base and make it harder to pay off the debt. However, if you do the exact opposite and you figure out targeted ways to increase economic growth, increase the number of jobs, you can increase the tax base and accelerate your ability to pay off that national debt. So that's what I'm going to talk about here: is what can we do to increase economic growth. The other thing is downstream in my plan, you'll hear me talk about affordability and how do we make life more affordable for the average American on a day-to-day basis. One of the best ways to do that is to create new high-paying jobs and make things affordable for people that way. So that's what I want to talk about here. Two things that you'll hear me focus on when I go through this plan. One is I'm very education focused because one of the best ways to create economic opportunities for people and to create new companies and new jobs is through education. And the other thing that you'll see that I'm focused on is technology. If the U.S. wants to drive economic growth, it needs to be a leader in technology and innovation, and it needs to be competitive with the rest of the world. It's always been a technology innovator. It needs to continue on that path going into the future in order to maximize growth. So I have 6 points to this plan. 4 of them are long-term growth plans. 2 of them are short-term growth, economic growth plans. So let me start with the first 4. The first one is where to focus education. So education, when it comes to financial aid, grants, educational assistance, I would focus all of that on engineering and STEM, medical and medical technologies, manufacturing, and skilled trades, specifically around skilled trades related to technology outcomes. Again, if you want to be a technology innovator, you need to have STEM and manufacturing and tradespeople trained up. And if you want to reduce the cost of healthcare, you need to have doctors, nurses, medical technicians trained up. The more that you have, the more you'll reduce the cost of all around all of that. The other thing I want to focus on here is we're not just talking about researchers, educating researchers, because people need jobs around the trades. In fact, I saw a talk recently from the CEO of Ford, and he was saying they had thousands of jobs open for people in skilled trades and manufacturing, but they didn't have people to fill them because we're not training those people. So that's one of the things we want to focus on. So if we focus on all those, it should focus all our educational efforts on those things with the highest outcomes. Number 2, when it comes to research, the federal government spends a lot of money on research, and that's a good thing. Research, if you want to be a technology innovator, you need to pay for the research. That's what other countries do. However, we spend a lot of money on things that are not technology related and not tied to employment outcomes, things in the social sciences. And again, I'm not beating up on those things because those are great projects, interesting work. But when you're sitting at $40 trillion of debt, you can't afford to do those types of projects anymore. So I would focus all the research spending on things that have specific commercial outcomes, a new company at the end, employment opportunities at the end of the research, those kinds of research things around the technology and medical spaces. Number 3, when it comes to spending on education, financial aid, and those sorts of things, we just make it available to all universities. That includes universities that are not that don't have a good business model. So there are universities out there that spend greater than 50% of their money on non-education things, bureaucracy and administration. There are places with administration that's greater than 50% of their spending. The reason they got there is because the federal government has been underwriting these institutions and saying, do whatever you want, we'll still pay for it. That's how we got there. So I would say I'd set a metric like 50% and say if you have greater than 50% spent on non-teaching and administration and bureaucracy, we're not paying for that anymore. So you now lost federal financial aid and grant funding. And then finally, you also have the institutions, we all know them, where they come and they say, okay, we're raising tuition this year 8% or whatever. Totally not in line with inflation and the cost of living because they can't manage their business. And the reason they're able to do that is because it's paid for by federal financial aid. So again, I would say if you raise your tuition greater than cost of living or inflation, we're not paying for it, you've lost financial aid. That will force them to get in line and provide a reasonable tuition, just like it was when I went to school. It's gotten out of control because this has all been underwritten. So if we do those things, it will force universities to get back in line, have reasonable business models that people can afford, um, and schools that people want to go to. And that's if there's other schools out there, by the way, that want to, you want to have an excessive administration, you want to have 75% administration and bureaucracy, and you want to raise tuition 10% next year, that's fine. You go ahead and do that, but we're not paying for it. You can't expect the federal taxpayer to pay for that. So those are I mean, those will definitely create long-term job opportunities and technology business opportunities for the next generation that will accomplish that long term. What do you do about people today that need opportunities and jobs? What do you do in the short term? So I have two things here. Number one is the corporate taxation system at the federal level doesn't make any sense. So as it stands now, every company out there is subject to the same federal taxation. Whether you're, a multi-billion-dollar multinational company or you're a small business with few employees, you're subject to the same federal taxation. That doesn't make any sense, obviously. So I would restructure this whole thing along four axes to encourage certain businesses to get up and running and not hinder them. So number one, if you're a large corporation, with multi-billion dollars in revenues, you would be subject to the standard corporate taxation rate at the federal level and the debt tax that I talked about. We need your help paying down that debt tax that you saw come along, that debt that you saw grow. If you're a small business with 50 employees, you would have a lower corporate tax rate and you would not be subject to the debt tax. Number two, we don't do any discerning decisions around what sector the companies are in. If you're in a manufacturing industry, you create technology products, you create medical devices. If anything like that, you're in semiconductors. You're at the same tax rate as a social media company, for example. Well, obviously, there's certain businesses that we want to encourage, and there's others that it's fine if you're in business, and that's great. So if you're in social media, you just pay the standard tax rate. But if you're in a manufacturing industry or something that employs a lot of people or some kind of high technology startup, we want to encourage that. Those are the jobs we want, those high paying jobs, and you would be in a lower taxation bracket. And that just stands to reason because something like a manufacturing company has a big startup cost, has a big infrastructure, has a lot of capital costs, and they also employ a lot of people once they get up and running. But it's a big infrastructure. Social media company doesn't have that burden, so we need to incentivize technology and manufacturing companies to get up and running like that. And it also makes sense because they both use the same infrastructure in society, but one is providing more jobs and the other's not. So we want to be selective where to encourage and reduce the tax rate and where not to. And by the way, that's not a new idea. Um, Neither of these are new ideas, taxing at different rates and based on sectors. There's different states that do that at the state level. There's different countries that do that because countries know we want to encourage this type of business. Number three, where you're at in the company history. If you're an older, mature company that's been around 100 years, you should be you're stable and you should be subject to the normal corporate tax rates. If you're a startup, let's say in the first 5 years of business, we want to encourage new companies and new job opportunities. You would get a reduced tax rate in, let's say, the first 5 years. And then finally, I would also discern based on whether you employ U.S. U.S. workforce. If you employ primarily U.S. workers, you should be at a lower tax rate. If you employ primarily foreign workers or contract workers or a foreign call center or something like that, you should be at a higher tax rate. And that stands to reason. One is they're both using the same infrastructure in society around us that they're taking advantage of that. One is giving back in terms of employment and income tax via those people as well. We want to encourage that they would be at a lower tax rate based on where they employ their people. So that's reforming the corporate tax system. Number two, the other thing I would do for short term to get job opportunities for Americans is I would severely restrict the H-1B visa system and retrain Americans if we need to. So obviously, the H-1B visa system has been abused over the years, over and over, as just a way to bring in low-cost employees. I mean, there are possibilities out there where there's nobody available to do a specific job. Those are a handful of opportunities. They're not thousands and thousands of situations. So, maybe there's a dozen or 100 of those cases. It's not thousands. Everybody else, we need to stop that. And if a company says, well, you don't have the person who could do this job, then let's talk about how to focus our education and train those people to do those jobs. So I would restrict the H-1B visa system. So how about in terms of measurables here? Virtually all these things are in the control of the executive branch, Department of Education policy, in terms of where to focus financial aid. Where to focus research goes through the executive branch agencies, and we can focus those via an executive order. The tax system would be reformed. We need to propose that to Congress in the first year for implementation in the second year. And then the H-1B visa system is easy to do right on day one, just to refocus the priorities. That's how the abuse started in the first place from all the past presidents in the H-1B visa system. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.